Ever have one of those series in the realm of anime and manga you know a bunch of people would love, but is a really hard sell for whatever reason? Perhaps it suffers from a lackluster adaptation in a sea of bombastic spectacle from the rest of its contemporaries. Perhaps it has an incredibly dense approach to storytelling, introducing a huge cast of characters and mechanics in a relatively small amount of time. Or perhaps it's just a slow burn with how it really gets into its full appeal. It gets good at however many episodes is a popular refrain with a lot of serialized fiction, long-running shonen in particular, and one that many resent, and that resentment is understandable. You shouldn't have to wade through hours upon hours of tedious or lackluster material to get to truly judge if a work is worthwhile or not. And yet, sometimes I do find those cases where the immediate hook of something you might well end up loving isn't always apparent and you might need a little guidance to see it. I used to find the clinical, protocol-driven, and emotion-devoid dialogue of Star Trek an immense turn-off, but after having a friend show me a handful of The Next Generation episodes, including one that contextualized that manner of speaking, the show suddenly clicked for me.
What year is this?
By your calendar, 2364.
What? What is that?
An android.
You mean a robot?
Actually, there's a distinct difference between an android and a robot.
And it wasn't simply that the series wasn't good up until that point. I just wasn't approaching it with quite the right mindset, although Season 1 of TNG wasn't the best. And so, World Trigger. A series with an avid, but mostly niche fan base that's 200 chapters into its run, with the anime's second season well on the way. A series where, whenever I bring it up to the average weeb, the response is either some retort in regards to the anime's stilted presentation, or just a general, I couldn't get into it. And the thing is, I used to be in that latter camp. For those who aren't aware, World Trigger takes place in Mikado City, a place frequently ravaged by attacks from mysterious invading monsters known as neighbors, and follows a student and trainee member of the city's main defense organization, Osamu Mikumo, a boy with a strong sense of justice who largely keeps his head down and lets life pass him by. Osamu comes into contact with a strange transfer student named Yuma Kuga, who later reveals himself to be a neighbor, and a seemingly friendly one at that. And their meeting results in Osamu's life being radically changed from then on. The manga focuses on both how the agency he works for, Border, deals with Yuma, and on their ongoing conflict with the other invading neighbors. The series is, first and foremost, a battle shonen, a genre of anime and manga with easily the most exposure and popularity. In case you weren't aware, it's a genre I am absolute trash for. What can I say, I'm a simple man, I like me some stylized action. Typically, this genre likes to get its hooks in you right from the get-go. Shonen manga magazines are sink-or-swim, competitive environments, so most series will want to establish a distinct, impactful art style, a premise with a unique spin to it, and/or a clear goal for the main character right off the bat. And on all three of these counts, World Trigger is a bit of an anomaly. The art style is quite low-key, without a huge amount of forced perspective or excessive amounts of bombast to the action. The characters' facial expressions tend to be subdued, and the designs are often homogeneous compared to other series' more outlandish, varied-looking casts. The initial premise doesn't seem to offer much more than otherworldly creatures attack Japan and our main cast are part of an organization that's mobilized to fight them, which can describe a lot of battle series. And the first chapter does not feature the main character clearly declaring his goal to signal to us, the audience, what we're going to be investing in for the long term. It is later established, but that's not what the series leads with. And I think it's that particular creative decision that had me asking myself on my first read-through, what exactly am I investing in here? What is the forward thrust of this series meant to be? While they do this to varying degrees, most other shonen very clearly dangle what the main protagonist is working towards in front of the reader on a regular basis. And while it's probably not the sole reason they'll enjoy the series, it gives you a very easy in. And that's not to say Osamu doesn't have goals he's striving towards. He does, and gains more as the series goes on. But these goals aren't pushed to the reader all that frequently, and particularly at the start of the series, he's a very reactive protagonist. He offers to help Yuma at the start and teach him more about Japan, more so out of a sense of duty than anything else. He's not looking to get anything out of it. And I think it's taken me until a full revisit of the series to fully grasp what its hook is. World Trigger is not a manga spearheaded by character goals. It's a manga that asks you to invest in its world, to want to find out more about it, and to care about the long-term growth of its underdog leads. Osamu, and the childhood friend he's sworn to protect, Chika Amatori. And luckily, these areas are where the series really shines. World Trigger's universe is so much more interesting than it might seem from the offset. At first, Mikado City just seems like a typical Japanese settlement, albeit one with some technical advancements we don't have in the real world. But the sci-fi elements in this city run strong throughout its makeup. Since the invasion started, Border has taken neighbor technology and used it to boost their own, creating tools and weapons that allowed them to better combat said neighbors, minimize casualties of both civilians and their own agents alike, and successfully defend the city from their attacks. And a great deal of thought goes into how Border functions, from how it was founded, to how it receives funding, to how they manage PR to earn civilian approval. Seriously though, that last one is a tad unnerving when they break it down. It's an organisation with a lot of internal politics. Some of the directors and agents carry a much more hostile attitude towards neighbours, viewing them simply as a threat to the people that need to be destroyed. Others don't see it as so black and white and just want to find ways to coexist and find non-hostile solutions to things where possible. And some just wish to secure the safety of the public, and have no strong views on the neighbours themselves either way. This of course makes the issue of how they want to deal with Yuma once they find out about him, which they do, a strong point of tension. Without giving too much away, since I feel like part of the fun with this series is finding out more about the setting as you go, there's a lot going on in the relationship and conflict between Border and the neighbours. The neighbours are not just a hive of mindless monsters, nor are they scheming megalomaniacal villains. They have varying physical forms, goals, and motivations, and the way they approach their impromptu visits to Earth changes based on what they know and how Border acts. And the direction of events shifting based on information known by a given character is a crucial part of World Trigger's DNA. Border knows very little about the neighbours, and as they discover more, so do we. And it's this sort of approach to storytelling that also applies to one of its most crucial elements: the combat. The way characters fight in World Trigger is highly strategic. They tend to fight in teams, and each weapon and or tool to be used on the field has very clearly outlined upsides and downsides. A Scorpion is an energy blade that is incredibly versatile and flexible. It also breaks very easily, however, so you need to be careful and clever about how you use it. Ray Gust, on the other hand, is very durable and can even act as a shield, but it's rather bulky to use and not ideal for cutting. And this doesn't just apply for melee weapons. Guns, equipment, all forms of Border tech have their own distinct uses and downsides. Add on to this the fact that the number of triggers one can carry and wield at once is limited, and the loadout alone plays a large part in any given character's strategy. Whenever one side has a winning tactic, the other will cop onto this quick and form their own countermove. Any Naruto fans watching will know Shikamaru is a fan favourite for his level-headed, tactical approach to combat. Well, I've heard some describe this manga as being like a whole cast of Shikamarus, and honestly that's not wholly inaccurate. Even the quirkier, brasher members of the cast tend to have the capacity to approach combat with a level head. And that's only scratching the surface with how creative the combat can be. Let's look at my favourite weapons. First, the Grasshopper. It's a set of bouncy energy platforms that can allow for agile traversal. Pretty straightforward, right? It's not commonly used in setting as of the start of the series, but then you introduce Yuma into the mix. As a neighbour, his already inhumanly dexterous physical ability is enhanced even more by what basically amounts to modded bouncy Mario mushrooms. Not to mention the fact that you can use them to bounce debris or random objects around, meaning you can launch projectiles with them. Or take a Scudo. Allows you to summon a series of barriers, can be used to defend, but can also be useful for boxing enemies in and limiting their options of attack and movement. See, spacing is a really key aspect to how the action pans out, which isn't something wholly unique to World Trigger, but I can't say I've come across a battle shonen where characters' positioning from each other is quite as frequently crucial as it is here. I'd compare its grounded technical approach to combat to something like the Nen system in Hunter x Hunter, but while that has a very everything in the kitchen sink approach to its complexity, and it introduces a lot of concepts then leaves them on the cutting room floor if Togashi doesn't find a use for them in the story, World Trigger is far less elaborate with each individual weapon and power, but also explores the possibilities of its combat system far more thoroughly. A big part of the fan community for this series involves theorizing just which triggers and tools would combine well with which, and the way the series is able to constantly come up with such creative outcomes for this only fuels this sort of theorizing further. It often approaches its action more like a sports series than a battle one, with a great emphasis on the various sparring matches Border holds to train its agents and let them rise up the ranks. Fights that focus more on technical plays, and a strong, tangible sense of the main protagonists developing their various skills and overcoming personal demons through their growth. Speaking of, let's talk about our two main characters, Chika and Osamu. About 20 chapters into the story, these two resolve to form a squad with Border and Yuma. And while Yuma is an alien child soldier with combat ability on par with some of Border's stronger agents, the same could not be less true of his two newfound teammates. Chika is a timid 13-year-old with no combat experience initially, but an absolutely huge reserve of the type of energy used for neighbor technology, and by extension borders, Treon. All humans in World Trigger have a gland that produces this energy source, but hers is abnormally large, and this greatly affects her capabilities on the field. Whenever she summons a shield trigger, it's nigh impervious. When utilizing the destructive Meteor and Hound bullets with a gun, their destructive force is amplified to an insane degree. And while this massive well of Treon lends itself to some incredibly fun action beats once she fights alongside the squad and gets a bit of a grip on how to use the weapons, it's also a source of great personal trauma to her. Her Treon has always attracted neighbours looking to harvest humans, so when said neighbours kidnap her child friend, and only a few years later her older brother mysteriously vanishes, she blames herself for these losses. The first time we even meet her, she runs into an unpopulated area during a neighbour attack in order to draw them away from other people, showing no regard for her own safety. A huge thrust of the story involves her overcoming the mental block that these traumatic experiences had on her, a block that makes it outright impossible for her to shoot humanoid targets. And this is not an easy process the series dishes out to her in her very first fight. It's a slow, heavy one that takes multiple arcs to grow past. While Chika's struggle is a largely internal one, Osamu's is very rooted in his own external abilities. He is not a strong fighter, nor is he gifted some miraculous weapon or power to give him an edge. He's a decent tactician, but nothing out of the ordinary by border standards. So when he becomes the captain of his squad, Osamu is thrown in the deep end. What follows is a rigorous series of trial and error, where he must both grasp what he as an individual is capable of on the field, and more crucially, how he can hone his own strategic ability in outpredicting opponents and utilising his teammates to their fullest. And, as with Chika, this is not something he achieves quickly or easily. Osamu can lose, and he loses a lot. But it's this slow burn that makes Osamu and Chika's achievements in the series all the more gratifying. You can't help but root for every little step they take and feel crushed for them when they run up against a wall. There's a lot more I could go into here, like how vast yet well-developed the sidecast are, many of which with their own goals, flaws, and character arcs entirely separate to Osamu's squad, and that they're so much more than merely a set of obstacles and personality quirks. But this here is the real core of World Trigger to me. Not simply the complex fights or the rich setting, but the way it links its organic, hard-earned character growth to its action. And if you're a fan of underdog narratives on any level, you'd be doing yourself a disservice not to give this series a look. Hey everyone, Hovin here, thanks for watching. This was a pretty big milestone for me. This is my first fully scripted, fully edited video. Hope you enjoyed it. It's been a little longer than I'd have hoped due to a computer breaking down, but I'm glad it's finally out. If you want to read the whole series, it's available in Viz's Shonen Jump Vault for the low price of $2 a month. And if you don't even want to pony up that much, well, you'll already know where to find alternatives. Though I will say that Ace Chrisman's lettering work, and Lillian Olsen, Caleb Cook, and Toshikawa Aizawa's translations are really good and well worth the price of admission. There's a bunch of other translators as well that are credited on one-off volumes. I'll throw them up on screen now. World Trigger has been a bit stop-starty in the past with regards to its release schedule, but it's down to a pretty consistent monthly one now, so yeah. And if you're still on the fence about diving headfirst into 200 plus chapters of a fairly dense manga, please consider following along with my read-through podcast, Duckface Diaries. In it, manga YouTuber Wensleydale Cheddar and I tackle the series volume by volume, giving it a brief recap and then breaking down our thoughts on it as we go. Hopefully this should serve as a nice kind of piecemeal, digestible entry point to anyone who finds the series a bit intimidating, and it should just serve as a fun retrospective for anyone who's already a fan. I'm just going to list the chapters covered in each episode so far here, so that you guys have a bit of a reading guide going in. The podcast releases monthly. We are a couple of volumes deep into one of the series' most exciting, significant, and just all-round action-packed arcs, having covered most of the introductory setup stuff, so it's a pretty perfect time to jump on board. Do give it a listen if you haven't, I'd really appreciate it. The musical covers of World Trigger's openings in this video can be found at Milo-Jack-Stillitz at soundcloud.com. Do give that a look if you'd like to hear them. I'm very happy with how they turned out. I don't know if I'll do more videos like this in the future. It's something that I want to do when I feel the inspiration, like with any given video. With all that said, I'm Dr. Hovin, thanks for watching, and see you all next time.